Canada's food bank system is breaking, not bending breaking. The organization that runs 5,500 food banks across this country just released a report with a warning that should stop every Canadian cold. If demand keeps rising at this pace, the entire network could collapse. Food banks in Ottawa and Kingston have already been forced to temporarily shut their doors, not because they chose to, because they ran out of food. Read that again. Food banks ran out of food. This is not a third world headline. This is Canada in 2025, one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, sitting on some of the most abundant agricultural land in the world, and people are being turned away from charity because the charity itself has nothing left to give. That is where we are. And if that does not make you stop and pay attention, nothing will. In March 2024, Canadians made 2.2 million visits to food banks in a single month. That is not a rounding error. That is not a seasonal spike. That is a line of desperate people that would stretch literally from Vancouver to Halifax. And that number is nearly double what it was in March 2019. In just 5 years, Canada went from a country with food insecurity issues to a country in the middle of a full-scale food crisis. The Food Banks Canada Hunger Count report, which surveyed all 5,500 member food banks across every province, confirms this acceleration is not slowing down. It is speeding up every single month. The numbers climb. Every single month more families cross a threshold they never imagined crossing, and every single month the political response has been insufficient, delayed, or completely absent. 1 in 5 people walking through food bank doors right now has a job, a full-time job. They wake up, they set an alarm, they commute, they clock in, they put in their hours, and when the shift is done and the paycheck clears, they still cannot afford to feed their families. That figure represents a 99% increase from 2019. Nearly double the rate of employed food bank users in just 5 years. Think about what that means at a fundamental level. The social contract, the basic bedrock promise that if you work in this country, you can survive in this country, has been broken, shattered. This is not a story about people who made bad choices. This is a story about a system that has stopped delivering on its most basic obligation, and no politician in Ottawa has offered a credible structural plan to fix it. 1 in 3 food bank users is a child, not a statistic, a child who made no financial decisions, signed no leases, took no economic risks, cast no votes, and has no voice in any of this. 1.3 million children in Canada are living in food insecurity right now. These are kids showing up to school without breakfast, sitting in classrooms trying to concentrate on reading and mathematics while their stomachs are growling loud enough for the kid next to them to hear. Teachers are watching this happen in real time. They are buying snacks out of their own pockets. School administrators are watching it happen and filing the same helpless reports year after year, and the government's National School Lunch Program, announced with great fanfare, press releases, and carefully staged photo opportunities, is, according to those same teachers and administrators on the ground, patchy, chronically underfunded, and not reaching most of the children who actually need it. Optics built for headlines, not outcomes built for hungry kids. Statistics Canada data confirms Canadian food inflation has been running significantly above the Bank of Canada's target for multiple consecutive years. Grocery prices across every major category, proteins, produce, dairy, staples, have climbed sharply and consistently since 2021. Families that once had a manageable monthly grocery budget are now spending dramatically more just to maintain the exact same basket of food they were buying 3 years ago. Wages have not kept pace. Additional work hours have not compensated, and the federal government's response has been the grocery and essentials benefit, a modest, time-limited direct transfer payment that, by the government's own projections, will not reduce the price of a single item on a single grocery store shelf anywhere in this country. It is a check designed to look like a solution while leaving every structural driver of those prices completely untouched. Here is what makes this damning beyond just the raw numbers. Canada's food price inflation has consistently outpaced comparable peer nations over the same period. Statistics Canada and independent economic analysts have documented that Canadian grocery price increases have diverged meaningfully from those seen in comparable economies. Facing the same global supply pressures, when your peer nations are managing to keep food costs lower while dealing with identical international headwinds, the same supply chain disruptions, the same energy costs, the same post-pandemic pressures, the explanation stops being global forces beyond anyone's control. The explanation becomes domestic policy, it becomes deliberate choices, it becomes the decisions being made in Ottawa boardrooms and parliamentary committees by people who, based on their own publicly disclosed financial statements, have never once had to choose between the protein and the produce at a grocery checkout line. And now the safety net itself is tearing at the seams. Food banks in Ottawa and Kingston, confirmed by multiple local news outlets, temporarily suspended operations entirely because their food supplier and rye, not reduced hours, not limited access, closed. Food Banks Mississauga set a $3 million fundraising target for its holiday campaign, the highest goal in the organization's history, and they set it not out of ambition but out of desperation. The operational budget of one major Canadian food bank grew from $1.5 million before the pandemic to $22 million annually today. That is not growth, that is triage at scale. And the people who used to make this system work, the Canadian middle class that donated canned goods and wrote annual checks, are now the ones showing up at the door with empty bags. When your donor base becomes your client base, the financial model does not bend, it breaks. There is also a side of this story that reveals a deeper moral fracture running through the country. Social media influencers have been documented showing up to food banks for content, filming themselves grabbing free groceries for views and engagement, while families who have no other option go without. There are widespread reports of individuals with significant financial means accessing food bank services because no meaningful verification or eligibility system exists to stop them. The network was built on trust. It was built for genuine crisis, and some people are treating it like a discount grocery outlet, taking from a system that was never designed to absorb. That kind of abuse, while military veterans, people who put on a uniform and risked their lives for this country, are standing in the same line just to eat dinner, that is not a food bank problem, that is a values collapse happening in plain sight. Mark Carney became Prime Minister in March 2025, inheriting a food affordability crisis that built and accelerated through years of prior federal management. He campaigned on affordability. He stood in front of cameras and told Canadians that bringing down the cost of living was his government's defining mission. He said it with the confidence of a former central banker who understood economic systems. But the structural conditions that are driving food prices have not changed since he took office. Grocery sector consolidation, with Loblaws, Sobeys, and Metro effectively controlling the national market with minimal meaningful competition, continues. Without serious regulatory intervention, fuel and transportation costs, which flow directly and immediately into food supply chain expenses and therefore into grocery prices, remain elevated. MPs during this same window approved increases to their own compensation packages. Canadians are not confused by any of this. They are watching. They are calculating, and they are keeping a very detailed score. The grocery and essentials benefit sounds like action. It was designed to sound like action. But when you actually examine what it does, the picture changes fast. It is a small dollar, short time frame transfer payment that puts a modest amount of money into people's accounts without touching the pricing structures, the market concentration, or the supply chain costs that created the problem in the first place. It does not force a single grocery corporation to lower a single price. It does not introduce a single new competitor into a market that desperately needs competition. It does not reduce the transportation markup on food moving across this enormous country. It is the political equivalent of treating a structural crack in a dam with a coat of paint and calling a press conference to announce the renovation. The dam is still cracking, the water is still rising, and the press release has already been forgotten. The 2025 World Happiness Report, a credible, peer-reviewed, internationally recognized annual ranking produced by the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, placed Canada 24th globally. That is Canada's lowest ranking since the survey began tracking national well-being. In 2015, Canada ranked 5th. On the entire planet, 5th in 10 years, Canada has fallen nearly 20 positions on a globally respected measure of how well a country is actually working for the people who live in it. That is not a statistical blip caused by a bad survey year. That is a sustained, multi-year, measurable decline in national well-being. That is a country that has lost something real, and the people feeling that loss most acutely are not the people at the top of the income distribution. They are the 2.2 million Canadians who walked through a food bank door last month just to make it to the end of the week. Beyond the food bank numbers, the crisis is reshaping entire communities in ways that are harder to measure but impossible to miss. Middle-class families in British Columbia and Ontario who spent years donating canned goods and volunteering on weekends are now sitting in their cars in food bank parking lots, working up the courage to go inside because they never imagined this would become their reality. Some of them are driving vehicles that would have seemed comfortable just 2 years ago. The shame is real. The disorientation is real. A country's self-image, the story it tells itself about who it is and how it treats its people is being dismantled one food bank visit at a time, and young Canadians are not being spared. Between February and April of last year, a quarter of Canadians aged 18 to 24 accessed a food charity because they did not have enough money to eat. An entire generation entering adulthood is being introduced to financial desperation before they have had a genuine chance to build anything. What actually needs to happen is not complicated. It is not mysterious. It does not require a task force or a royal commission or another round of consultations. It requires politicians who are willing to prioritize people over the political relationships and corporate donors that benefit from the status quo. First, real, structural competition in the grocery sector, break the effective oligopoly, lower the barriers that prevent independent and regional grocers from entering the market and competing on price. Let actual market competition do what government press releases about competition have consistently failed to do. Second, a serious, honest review of the fuel and transportation cost burden embedded in Canada's food supply chains, because every dollar added to the cost of trucking food across this country is a dollar that lands directly on the consumer's receipt. Third, wages that are genuinely indexed to what life actually costs in 2025, not what it cost a decade ago when the affordability math was fundamentally different. The fourth piece is the social safety net, and this one matters most for the long-term employment insurance modernization that actually reflects the way Canadians work today. Serious housing investment that addresses the single largest cost pressure squeezing household budgets nationwide, child nutrition programs that are funded at a level that matches the actual scale of the problem, not the scale that fits neatly into a ministerial announcement, and a fundamental rethinking of what food banks are supposed to be. They were designed as emergency infrastructure, a temporary bridge for families in crisis. They have become, for millions of Canadians, a permanent monthly grocery plan. That transformation was never supposed to happen. The fact that it has happened and that the government has essentially accepted it as the new normal is one of the most damning indictments of federal policy in a generation. Here is what keeps this from being just another policy debate. Hunger does not just hurt in the moment. The research on this is not ambiguous. Food insecurity during childhood measurably reshapes brain development. It limits cognitive capacity during the years when that capacity is being formed. It compounds educational disadvantage, reduces lifetime earning potential, increases long-term healthcare costs, and sets children up for decades of compounded difficulty that no amount of future policy can fully reverse. Canada is not just failing 1.3 million children today, it is statistically, scientifically, measurably limiting what those children will be able to contribute, build, achieve, and become over the course of their entire lives. Every single month of government inaction makes that damage deeper and harder to undo. Canada has the resources. It has the agricultural capacity, the infrastructure, and the national wealth to solve this. What it does not have right now today is leadership, willing to make the choices that are politically uncomfortable but humanly necessary. Until that changes, the lines at food banks will keep growing longer. The children will keep going to school hungry, and the country that has spent decades calling itself one of the greatest places on earth to live will keep failing, quietly and systematically. The millions of people who need it most. So the question that should be driving every vote, every town hall, every dinner table conversation across this country is simple. Will Ottawa finally act before the system that was never supposed to be permanent becomes the only system we have left?